Hi there. In today's video, I'm going to talk about Microsoft's top interview questions, and I prepared here the list. It's actually 2 pages, which I'm going to go through next. The questions are pretty standard, I should say, but I wouldn't be doing a video about this unless I thought there's something interesting to share with you when it comes to differentiating yourself from other candidates during a job interview. And by the way, these questions, you can also find them in the video description right next to that like button. Okay, why are these questions, the behavioral questions in particular, important in such interviews? In my opinion, in a similar way that we used to say that 5 or 10 years ago, the elevator pitch and how you make a first impression would be the last impression in a job interview. Same way you could differentiate yourself today with the behavioral part of the interview. So, long story short, even if your subject matter expertise is not stellar, you could eventually compensate using some actually preparing for a behavior interview to show them that you care about this interview and be more successful with your application, right? Going to the questions. So the first and most commonly asked question in job interviews with Microsoft is your elevator pitch. Your tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume and highlight your relevant experience. And together with this, why do you want to work for Microsoft, or where do you see yourself in 5 years? Okay. And by the way, if you're speaking to an HR audience, you should ensure that you include this, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years, because it's music to HR's ears. Okay, now when it comes to actual answers to why Microsoft, for vast majority of us, this is an easy decision, and I'd really be straightforward and honest about this. Working with some of the smartest people on earth is good enough of a reason to want to join this company. But on the more peculiar types of answers I've heard, actually from someone who works at Microsoft, was that answering this why Microsoft could be something on the lines of, hey, I'm not actually sure I want to join Microsoft just yet. I'm just learning about the opportunity and see on whether this could be a good fit for us, for both of us, as a result of this interview. So showing a bit of backbone also sells quite well. And of course, to the extent you feel comfortable doing it. With respect to your elevator pitch, you tell me about yourself. Another interesting and useful way to find what's the best example for your specific scenario would be to use ChatGPT. So I'm recommending you to use ChatGPT, but only for the elevator pitch, because here, there's there's a lot of information that they have, and they can give you some interesting pointers. Okay, I'm not asking you to clone ChatGPT, of course, but it does give you interesting references. I know this from my trainings and coaching, that it's useful. Okay, so this would be how you would differentiate yourself with your elevator pitch, or why Microsoft in a job interview. Next, the most commonly asked behavioral question in a job interview with Microsoft would be, tell us of a key challenge and how you resolved it, or describe a challenging situation you faced at work or school and how you resolved it. What is the hardest problem you have solved, or a time when you had to overcome adversity, or give me an example of a time when you managed a project, or what's your most successful achievement and what did you do to achieve it? Okay, or what are you the most proud of? Various ways, various flavors of the same question. But if I may translate all these questions to you in one sentence, that they are asking you for your best story. Okay, your best story is something you must really, stories, of course, going into an interview is something you must really be able to develop and talk about for, I don't know, entire interview session. Okay, but too many of you at first make the mistake to not really understand why they ask you a question. Okay, so a time when you had to overcome adversity, it's not straightforward to translate it as your best story, only if you know to sell yourself. The second one is people don't actually prepare of this, or prepare them superficially. What do I mean by superficial? Well, any behavioral question is best answered using the STAR format: situation, task, action, and result. Okay, and the reason for preparing star answers is not only because your communication will improve or your answer will be easier to understand, but because the interviewers will expect you to use this framework. It's, if you want, as an API. Okay, so if they hear answers in the star format, you will score more points during the job interview automatically. It's as simple as that, and it works for any role, developer or director level role. Now, of course, if you're applying for a director level role, there are some more advanced ways to use to answer these questions, to dramatize them a bit more, and so on and so forth. But I believe it's slightly beyond the scope of this video. But long story short, a challenge your best story, that's the most commonly asked interview question in Microsoft interviews, apart from your elevator pitch. So I believe it's well worth some time investing into it. I actually call these stories as gifts they give you during the interview. Next, another type of behavioral question. Give me an example of when you had a conflict with someone on your team and what the result was. What steps would you take to avoid this in the future? Or how do you deal with difficult people? Or a time when you had a conflict with your boss. Okay, pretty standard interview question, a conflict with someone, okay, coworker or boss. And from experience, there's a tendency to answer this question in the same way, like the conflict was due to some difference of opinion, for instance. So you had a meeting or two to share thoughts, listen, and ultimately resolve, and then you worked happily ever after. Okay. There's nothing wrong with such an answer. It's just that the objective is to differentiate yourself from other candidates during a job interview. So in real life situation, it's not as straightforward as that. To give an example, during one of my first meetings with my technical PM, she was working for me remotely. I didn't realize I had been over aggressive towards her, and I made her cry. Okay, so I, of course, served as a big lesson for me to understand there's differences and expectations, including cultural differences between us. But anyway, so as an outcome for this experience, we worked together for the next 8 years. Okay, another strong example I've heard of conflicts is when, and this is actually the best pitch you could ever do with conflict, is to link them to a business outcome. Yes, you disagree with a colleague. There are, some conflicts internally, but for the sake of a business outcome, you negotiate and you find common ground and you deliver. And you don't have to end up as best friends, by the way, so long the business works and it's a successful outcome, right? So this would be a few notes about how to answer questions around conflict, which are the second most commonly asked behavioral questions in Microsoft interviews. Next question, what is your favorite Microsoft product and why? And the variation of this, which product would you tell Satya to discontinue? Now, I must be honest with you that I had to dive really deep into my usage of Microsoft products and services to find something I particularly like and use on a regular basis these days. However, there's actually a list on Microsoft's website with all these services and products, which I inspired myself from to get this one, but it's Windows Defender. Okay, so I actually use it every day and I actually believe it's a great product. And if I may recommend something as improvement, is to allow to disable other antivirus services more easily. But yeah, this is my favorite Microsoft product. And of course, these types of questions are best answers when you prepare them in advance. All right. Next type of question. Tell me about the time when you worked with a team, or are you comfortable with working in a team setting? Or how do you handle a situation when there is significant disagreement among team members? Or describe your experience working with engineering or sales teams. If there is a conflict in your team, how would you solve it? Okay, I noticed that these questions around working in a team are actually the number one trending behavioral questions in job interviews at Microsoft, and even beyond Microsoft these days. Could be also linked to the remote work trend, and probably because less and less people have experience with working in actual teams these days, or working in teams in general these days. But reason why they're so common is not as important as to how to answer it. So what would be some examples here of handling team disagreement? And one interesting I remember was when two technical people on my team had different opinions on how to implement a new feature. One was saying to put all the features, all the options within one dialog box, a big one, and the other was saying to make it as a wizard, to make 3 or 5-step process, if I remember correctly. They were basically fighting each other, like, hey, my idea is better, no, mine is better. And there was actually no straightforward way for me to decide, hey, which one is best way to go. And I realized that, hey, you know what, the decision itself to which way is best is not as important, as to moving on, having progress on this thing, and actually implementing those features either way would take only 2 days for each. So I decided that, let's say both are the best possible options, implement them, and we'll try them out. And we A/B tested them for 2 weeks, and we found out which one worked best. And this actually helped us to, help myself to be more credible, and also to diffuse the tension there. And also, these people were both happy because both of their ideas got implemented. I believe this is an example when of a setting where I was successful working in a team. Okay. Another example of working in a team, and this for more, of course, for manager level roles, is when someone is underperforming and everyone else notices. I had this as well, and in such a setting, I literally did, once I found out about this, I literally did everything I could to support them. However, their attitude, they really had developed an attitude problem at that point, and I really had to be straightforward and let them go at that point, because I wanted to avoid a more generalized conflict, and basically it was endangering the whole team. So the learning was, actually it was a failure on my end because I should have acted much sooner. So the learning was to gain much better insight into how the team works, even if I'm managing that team remotely, and really try to be connected, to stay connected, to have not only regular virtual meetings, but to also go on site and get the temperature of the team and see what works and what doesn't. Because in the internet you can have tension forming which doesn't show in words. You must see that person, you must talk to that person to better connect with them and understand what's going on. Okay, so working in teams is a trending behavioral question which I highly recommend you to seriously prepare for the interview. Next one, describe a time when you missed a deadline. What did you do? Or describe a time when you made a mistake, or tell me about the time when you failed, right? Or when did you fail last time? Okay, to translate these questions for you, when did you fail last time is, what's your best failure story? Simple as that. Okay, and this is a behavioral question, of course, so it deserves a star answer. Okay, with some notes here that the situation and task and action should be half of the answer, and the results should be the learnings from your failure, which should be as much as 50% of your answers. Also, in case you're wondering, people cannot usually think of failures on the spot during a job interview, and that's why they are a good indicator of someone prepared or not for the interview. This is one reason they ask you, and the second reason is because they ask you this to learn to see what you learned from it, or if you learned something from this experience. Okay, but from experience, the main one is that if you prepare this in advance, and it might take as many as 3 attempts to find the proper failure story, but if you prepare them in advance, you should be good to go here. Next, tell me about the time when you had to make an important decision with limited information, or tell me about a difficult decision you had to make, or how do you handle decision in ambiguous situations. Okay, so decision-making processes. So of course, this is more important for managerial or executive types of roles, but it's also important for developers. It's also getting asked as well. And how do you best answer questions around decision-making with frameworks? Okay, for example, a framework would be type 1, type 2 decision. Type 1 being reversible decisions, easily reversible because they're not as important. the outcome not being super important, or type 2 decisions, the one which are time consuming and require, data communication, delegation, and everything else, because they're really important. You cannot go wrong on these ones. Okay. For example, if you remember my previous example with the two people fighting over whether to do the features within one screen or within as a wizard, 5-step wizard, that was an example of type 1 decision, which is easily reversible. I mean, either way, it's fine, just move on, Or another type of reversible is when you have to estimate timeline for a given task. If the requirements are ambiguous, you just estimate because you can change your mind later on. Of course, unless it's key, but usually this is how it goes. And type 2 decisions are decisions which you cannot skip. It's, a wisdom tooth extraction. Either you do it, either you don't. But if you do it, then I don't think you can have an implant for a wisdom tooth. Okay, so you cannot get it back. So again, frameworks. If you have frameworks, and you should have frameworks for any possible role, frameworks that are important, then that's the best way to go. You'll see we'll have another type of question related to decision making a bit later. What are your biggest weaknesses and strength-based questions, or what is your superpower? Okay, so public speaking is the favorite weakness, not only in the US but also worldwide, I believe. Toastmasters is the story to pitch it, but the reason why I'm making this video is not because I want to give you generic ideas, but to give you something more peculiar to differentiate yourself again in a job interview from other candidates. So for example, for a developer, you could talk about sales as your weakness, okay, or sales, vice versa, or I don't know, for a manager level role, for some technology you don't own, you don't master, but you intend to. Of course, unless it's a key requirement for your role, but I believe you see that in the job description. And speaking of job description, please don't take strengths. Don't take the job description as sort of reference document that the only thing that matters for a job interview, because it's not. It's just a marketing manifesto these days, okay? Speaking of strengths, actually I learned this from someone at Microsoft, that in a job interview you always sell yourself on your strengths. Okay, if you don't know your strength, you don't know what you're selling yourself on. All right, this is why investing time to find your strength is something that it's a worthwhile investment. Finding 3 strengths, it's even better. Okay, but the point is that sell yourself on your strength during job interview, and of course the answer to what's your strength, what's your superpower becomes obvious. But preparing your strength is a good investment of your time. Next question. How do you stay updated with the latest technological trends and development? How would you solve a problem if you were unfamiliar with the technology required? Or describe a recent research paper you found interesting. Okay, so these questions are behavioral questions as well. So they're asking for, tell me about time when you learned something interesting, such a research paper, or 3 research papers if you want. Needless to say, they're looking for star answers if you can, and the most common mistake people do here is to learn from one source at most. Hey, I know that one guy on YouTube, it's everything you need to learn about a certain topic. No, it's not as simple, it's never as simple as that. It's always fun. You must learn from multiple sources, and you take what's interesting for you from those sources, right? Pretty easy, I believe, to understand how to go about answering questions about learning. Next, how do you prioritize your tasks and manage your time effectively, or prioritization of the work list in general? Okay, so you remember the questions around decision making and how I emphasize that it's all about linking those with frameworks to make yourself more credible during the job interview. Well, answering questions about prioritization is basically the same thing, just one step even further. You could even go as far as to demo those concepts of prioritization using a flip chart if you want, and the framework that you use to do this. I won't get into frameworks because they're really specific to any role. There are frameworks for customer service, there are frameworks for developers, for executive roles. So this is the keyword you must understand, and you must document yourself from there. But prioritization, decision making, you see, there's also pretty commonly asked questions as well. Next one, talk about a difficult interaction with the customer and how did you manage to resolve it, and what did you learn from it? Describe a time when a customer told you no and how you responded. How would you handle a question a customer had that you don't know the answer for? Okay, so this is widely for customer-facing roles, okay, or customer support roles if you want, but still you should know that customers could be internal as well. Okay, so even this question could even make sense for a developer. Okay, not as commonly asked, but still happens. Okay, but the topic for a company to show customer obsession is a huge one, especially in business these days. Okay, and I won't get into why it's important and so on and so forth, but customer obsession, there are people who are customer obsessed and there are people who cannot be customer obsessed. Okay, you cannot easily coach or teach customer obsession to someone. But again, this is only relevant for customer facing roles. Okay, so what they're really interesting here is you're customer focused or not. Okay, so if this is something that you believe it's relevant for your role, then you should definitely prepare it. How you work and influence cross-functionally, or how do you build trust with other teams? What would you do if you needed to influence but could not control an outcome? Tell me about a time when you had to lead or influence a team without any authority given by higher-ups. Okay. Why do they ask you such questions in a job interview? Because they want to see about your interpersonal skills. These are same conflict type of same behavior as the conflict questions here. And how do you build influence? How do you develop influence? By gaining someone's trust. If you earn their trust, then you basically influence. All right. So how do you influence them? By listening them. Listening skills are great tools to influence someone, in case you didn't know. But, you know, of course, listening, discussions, and all this stuff. I believe it's it's an extension again about working in conflict. Trying to convince someone is still conflict. And I gave examples, so I won't insist on this one for now. How would you describe the cloud to a child? How would you explain how to use a smartphone to your grandparents? Walk me through, teach me a process that you're familiar with end to end. Okay, so this question used to be one of the most commonly asked questions in job interviews in 2020, and I made another video for that. And here it's not even close. Okay, so they stopped asking this question. Basically, one of the key reasons why they used to ask you this, because they want to see how you do with clarity of thought. There are people who can explain. There are people who cannot explain. Okay, people who can explain usually score high on clarity of thought. Okay, if you can score high on clarity of thought in general in job interviews, that's also a big asset, even a strength if you can explain complex concepts in simple terms. Okay, so this is something also you should be aware of. Tell me about the time you had to come up with a creative solution to a difficult problem, or talk about the time when you were innovative or inventive. Okay, so what's an invention you made? Okay, so think about a couple of innovative things you've achieved in the past. What's your greatest invention or inventions? Ideally 3 of them. And of course, link them to the job if at all possible. It's not mandatory to link them with the job, but it should be at first interesting. But then if it's also linked to your main area of expertise for the job that you're applying for, then that would be even better, right? Next one, how have you worked with colleagues you've disagreed with in the past? Or talk to me about the time when you had disagreement with a coworker or your boss and how you worked through that disagreement. Okay, so these questions are together with the conflict questions and with the influence questions around interpersonal skills. Okay, the reason why I added this separately, because showing disagreement is not only about, for example, with the boss, interaction with the boss, that the boss was right and I agreed, and yes, he was always right, and I'm a type of yes sir type of employee. I believe that's a big mistake in the job interviews, and there's also even something they call the backbone test. So if you show a bit of backbone, you showcase an example that exhibits you have a bit of backbone with these things, to motivate your decision-making process. I believe it's also very much to your advantage. So key to know here is, the backbone test. In disagreement, you must find a good example of a time when you disagreed with someone. This would be the main thing, and other than that, it's about interpersonal skills. So I talked about this twice before. Next one, tell me about the time when you were working as a team and one of your teammates was not as motivated as you were. What did you do? Okay, so notice here, this is another question around team, about work and about motivation. How do you motivate someone? How do you influence someone? Okay, to be straightforward. As I previously said, by listening. And this is really, really, really hard. Like, it took me 1 full year of coaching to really listen to people, to really understand how to listen to people. And this is on top on my other years of experience of managing around 150 IT projects with many hundreds of people. Okay, so listening is hard work, but really this I believe it's key for me to even to motivate someone. But of course, other than that, would be how to motivate. Well, why weren't they motivated in the first place? Maybe for manager level roles, it could be because of pay, or maybe because of culture, maybe because it's boring. Okay, geniuses tend to get bored quite often, quite easily. And motivation could also often be linked to success. Okay, if a business doesn't work, the team will become less motivated over time. Yes, so challenge for you is to find the best possible example of a time when someone got demotivated and you understood why, and you listened carefully to them so you could remotivate them on that thing. How you motivate people? Well, you can motivate them both financially, but I believe that's pretty much obvious, but also through cultural values. If people connect well to your company's culture, they tend to be far more motivated. Trust me, it works, right? So this would be how you would go about answering this question. Okay, and then last but not least, there are open-ended questions. What motivates you? What gives you energy in work? What is your leadership style? Or what's your management style? Or how do you work? Or how do you prioritize? Okay, so basically they are looking for star examples of a time when something motivated, of a time when you prioritize something, or a time when you manage the team, or 3 times when you manage the team if you want. Okay, or a time when your working style was peculiar and made a difference. Okay, so these open-ended questions are still behavioral questions. They are harder to spot, especially if you're unprepared for the interview, because you don't know why they're asking you this. Okay, but the moment you connect them with a behavioral question about a specific, tell me about the time when, then it becomes far more obvious as to why they ask them, and of course how to answer them. Okay, also open-ended questions tend to be asked in more important type of roles and are best answered not with 1 example, but with 3 examples if you have them, if you can. Okay, let them choose, which way they want to go. So this will be the list of questions. What's not included in this list of questions is that they usually ask a ton of follow-up questions. Okay, so be prepared to dive deep, like uncomfortably deep into details, especially during a final interview round. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you to prepare stories, okay, not just answer to questions, and to really try to remember all the details of a project, even if it happened 15 years ago. Okay, if it's a highlight, if you want to talk about during the job interview, then it's hugely important you remember all the details, because if you don't, there's also the deep dive test. That's the favorite test people, executives use to spot if someone is credible during a job interview. Credible could mean that either you don't remember because you didn't own the project, either you don't remember because you didn't prepare the interview. Okay, but nevertheless, credibility is the main thing with diving deep with these things. Of course, it could be a little bit of backbone test as well within these deep dives, but you do understand where I'm going with this. So hopefully you found this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.